Want to know what fallen trees and broken branches have to do with who gets what when you die? Well, stay tuned as I reveal the 4 biggest beneficiary blunders and how to avoid them.
Welcome to the only show in the country dedicated to helping savers worry less about money, the WorryFree Retirement, with your host, best-selling author and fiduciary, Tony Walker.
I don't know what part of the country you're from or where you currently live, but where I was born, raised, and still reside, the great state of Kentucky, we have a lot of trees. And while I've never driven around Kentucky counting the number of trees that exist in the old bluegrass state, my uneducated guess is that there are literally millions of them. And what's interesting in Kentucky anyway, these trees come in all shapes, colors, and sizes. Some trees are very tall, some are very small. Some are fat and some are skinny. Some trees are supported by significant and deep roots providing protection for the trees so that they can weather the storms and high winds that are sure to come. Other trees have very little root systems to support them and can topple over with just the slightest of a gust of wind. Trees are important to our environment and our way of life, but as trees age and grow, if not properly taken care of, they can cause a lot of problems and a lot of damage. You see, over time, you just can't leave a tree to grow on its own. It has to be cared for. Left unattended, there's a lot that can damage a tree. There's ice, wind, various disease, bugs, large animals, vermins, fire, limbs that grow too heavy. The list of things to consider goes on. And like us humans, left to their own demise, trees can grow out of control and over time create a mess. The care and maintenance of trees is so important that specialists are around to take care and maintain them. They're called arborists. You see, if a tree is not regularly monitored and pruned, it can die or at best become a nightmare to maintain. And believe it or not, your family tree is the same way. Left unattended, the plans you attempt to make for your family and your money can get out of control, and worse yet, when you die, the plans you thought you had in place for loved ones could all come crashing down. Well, welcome folks to the WorryFree Retirement. And yes, I am that little man in the sweater vest, financial arborist and family tree planning specialist, Tony Walker. And today we are going to show you the 4 biggest beneficiary blunders people make when trying to leave money to their loved ones and how you can avoid creating a mess. But first, let me introduce the producer of today's show, none other than America's favorite financial sidekick, Mr. Aaron Orander, along with his 2 new sidekicks. At the technical helm and graphics, Mr. Derek Hudson, and technical assistant, Miss Amelia Johnson. All right, I see it every day. Well-intentioned savers who are working hard to provide for their families and to provide for their own retirement. Yet, with all of this saving and planning over time, the biggest issue I see is savers forgetting to prune and manage their family tree. You see, your life and your money are a lot like maintaining a tree. If left unattended, if not kept in check, and yes, if not maintained and monitored by a trained retirement specialist, the assets you've worked so hard to create during your lifetime could come crashing down after you're dead and gone. That's why I'm going to spend the entire show first talking about the 4 types of properties and which ones actually go through your will. And then I'm going to talk about the 4 biggest beneficiary blunders and how to avoid them. And finally, we're going to talk about how to keep things simple, how to keep this family tree in good shape now, both while you're alive and when you're dead and gone. So stay tuned. I'm Tony Walker. You're watching the WorryFree Retirement. I'll be right back.
If someone wants to roll their 401k over to you, is there a cost to that?
There is no cost whatsoever. So what happens is, the good thing is a 401k in most cases has no cost to roll it out. In other words, your current custodian, whoever's handling that, won't charge you to move it over. We handle all the details. When we put it in our products, there's no upfront cost. If we use annuities, they pay us a one-time commission, but those commissions are paid by the company. That doesn't come out of your pocket. That's built into the annuity itself. The Schwab program we use, we charge fees, but those fees are quarterly and they're charged what's called in arrears. So you would put the money in, you wouldn't get a fee charged until 3 months later. So there's absolutely no cost, no tax liability as long as it's done properly to move that 401k over to Tony Walker Financial. Have you recently retired, been laid off, or offered a pension buyout? Has the company you work for moved, been acquired, or closed its doors forever? And finally, do you have a 401k with a previous employer you'd like to move to safer territory? Then take advantage of this opportunity to move your 401k or lump sum pension to Tony Walker Financial. Let's meet in person to discuss your retirement options. Log on now to TonyWalkerFinancial.com to schedule your free, no obligation appointment. Let us help you today. On a recent episode of the Worry-Free Retirement, we dealt with the subject of grief, which we defined as the loss of something in our lives that is very significant to us. When we think of loss and grief, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is the loss of a loved one. And as unfortunate and painful as this type of loss is, there is the difficult task of making sure that when a loved one dies, your plans are kept up to date. You see, just like a tree that is damaged or has a limb break off, that tree needs to be nurtured and watched very closely. It must be shaped and pruned to be sure that the rest of the tree remains healthy. Same holds true for your money and who is going to get what when you die. Left unmonitored, who will get your stuff may actually surprise you. So let's start out first with the 4 types of property, assets if you will, and how these assets can be owned and which of these 4 actually goes through your will, and why understanding this is very, very important to understanding who's going to get what when you die. Okay, let's take a look at the first type of property, and it's called solely owned property. Now, an example of solely owned property would be I go off to the car dealership and buy a car. Maybe Susan's busy and I buy the car and the salesman says, hey, whose name do we put this in? And since Susan's busy and I just say, just put it in my name. So now the title of the car would be in Tony Walker's name or solely owned. The second type of asset in terms of how assets are possessed would be called jointly held. Now there is jointly held with tenants in common, but the most common jointly held property is with rights of survivorship. So for instance, Susan and I own a home. That home has each other listed as the survivor on the deed. So if either of us dies, again, the home goes to the survivor listed. The third type of property or asset is that in trust or contract. Now, trust could be what's called a living trust or an irrevocable trust, and a contract obviously is something between yourself and another party whereby that spells out who's going to get what when you die. And the fourth type, actually the most popular way assets are held, as you'll see this in a minute, is what's called named beneficiary. So let's kind of set the stage before we talk about these 4 assets. Let's imagine that you run out because you want everything to go to your wife and your kids or whatever, and you get what's called a will. Sounds good, right? You get your will, everything's set up. You make sure that everything in your will at your death goes to your spouse, and everything that the spouse would then have would go to the kids, and everything's taken care of. Well, we know that solely owned assets go through the will, but let's take a look at jointly held. Where does that go when you die? Well, as you see, it goes down to your spouse or partner. It does not go through the will. Well, what about assets owned in trust or contract? Surely they would go through the will. Nope, they go and bypass the will as well. And here's the one that always gets people. If you think about named beneficiaries, nope, those don't go through the will either. So here's the big problem. Let's imagine now that your partner passes away, okay, and you have children out there. If things aren't set up properly, and I see this happen a lot, the children can be left out in the dark, especially if someone remarries, if they forget to update their beneficiaries, grandchildren can be affected. This can be a huge issue. So what we're going to do when we come back, I'm going to go over the 4 biggest beneficiary blunders out there and how you can avoid them. You're watching the Worry-Free Retirement. I'm Tony Walker. I'll be right back.
Call me old-fashioned, but I love the fact that my husband takes care of all the finances. But if something happened to him, where would I turn?
The grief associated with losing a spouse is hard enough. don't make matters worse by not having a written game plan.
Don't leave your future to chance. Get a game plan now with one of the most experienced and trusted names in the business. Log on to TonyWalkerFinancial.com. That's TonyWalkerFinancial.com.
Welcome back to the Worry-Free Retirement. And not only do we take our clients from cradle to grave, we also in our offices have someone who, when we do happen to have a spouse or someone who passes away, or we need to update their beneficiaries, our own Mandy Houchins at Tony Walker Financial is there to help. Good morning to you, Mandy.
Good morning, Tony.
Everything going okay?
Everything's great here.
Great. So, Mandy, basically, let's talk about your role at Tony Walker Financial. I know you help a lot with the income plans and other things, but let's talk specifically about your role of making sure that our clients' beneficiaries are kept up to date.
Sure, Tony. Basically, what I do is I service those annuities. So anytime someone needs to make a change, verify their beneficiaries, or, if they even have a death, then I'm the one responsible for helping them update those on each of their annuity contracts.
And we've had some situations even since you've been there. Obviously, we have a very large clientele, and many of these folks are over the age of 65. So the likelihood that one of themselves or their spouses could pass away, or we're seeing this occasionally where they lose their adult children. Just speak to the point of where we step in when someone steps out of that situation and how we can help those folks. And also, I guess, for lack of a better word, the rewarding experience you have of knowing that we're helping them in a time that's very difficult for them.
Sure. Basically, what I do when a client or a spouse of a client passes away, they contact us to let us know of that death. And we basically try to hold their hand through that process. It's a tough time for people. They're overwhelmed with so many things to do. So we try to be very supportive. We offer to go through each claim form with them and make sure that they are getting that service from beginning to end, exactly the way they want to move forward with that contract.
And I know, Mandy, as we continue to move forward and grow our practice and take on more and more savers, we just so much appreciate your willingness to help. I know that's kind of been a difficult task for a lot of our staff in the past, but you've taken on this task very well, and we so much appreciate you helping our clients and helping them through this process. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I do enjoy helping the clients, Tony.
Well, very good. Good job, and have a good day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Speaking of beneficiaries and trying to do estate planning, back in the 1980s, I was wanting to learn how to do estate planning. My father-in-law suggested I learn from a very well-known estate planner who, after some coaxing from my father-in-law, agreed to allow me to tag along on some appointments. I'll never forget, he took me to a brick company that was owned by two partners. Concerned over what might happen to one of the partners and their share of the business should something happen to them, my estate planning mentor and I sat down with the partner and discussed all of these concerns and what would happen when one of them would die, and to the business and the families. After patiently listening to my planner friend explain all the damage that would ensue upon one of the partners' death, the brick business owner quietly leaned over the desk with a smile and said, "You know what? Me and my partner don't talk much about dying." Unfazed by the business owner's response, my planner friend looked at him, turned to me, and looked back at him and said, "You know what? That's funny. Me and Tony don't talk much about bricks either." The point is, this man and his partner needed a plan, and so that upon one of their deaths, the remaining partner and spouse could be okay. And while you may not own a business, you probably do own a 401k, maybe a 403b, IRA, Roth IRA, an annuity, and possibly even life insurance. And what's interesting, as we discussed earlier, none of these assets go through your will. They go through by something called beneficiary designations. So how you list those beneficiaries and how you keep them pruned over time is a huge issue, and one that I see, and we call this the 4 biggest beneficiary blunders. Let's take a look at beneficiary blunder number 1. First of all, not even naming a beneficiary. I see this sometimes, and people, maybe they're single or they've never had children, and they say, "Well, don't worry about it. I'll just leave my life insurance to the estate." Remember, whenever you name the estate as a beneficiary, the state steps in and state statutes take over, which is not what you want. So always, if you have a 401k, IRA, Roth IRA, life insurance, annuities, even if you don't have any immediate family members, name somebody and or a church or charity directly. Otherwise, that money goes into probate. Let's look at beneficiary blunder number 2, not having what's called a contingent beneficiary. An example of this would be, let's say you have a spouse and a couple of children, and you just don't think about it, and you name the spouse, and then you forget to name the children, and again, you name the estate or leave it off. Again, that's a problem. If you and your spouse were killed in a common accident, because you haven't named the 2 children, there could be problems in them getting the estate, and fights could ensue, all kinds of crazy things could happen. So always name a contingent beneficiary. Number 3, that blunder's a good one, just outdated beneficiaries. Now again, this is a tough subject because we've had people who have actually lost spouses, or they've even lost adult children, and they forget to update those beneficiaries. They're outdated, they're irrelevant, and as we're going to see in a minute, this can be a huge, huge problem. So if anything's changed in your life, anything whatsoever, divorce, death of a loved one, death of a spouse, a child, whatever, make sure you update your beneficiaries. And finally, the other blunder I see, people again thinking that having a will is enough. Remember folks, most assets do not go through the will. 401ks and 403bs and life insurance and annuities, all those things pass by beneficiary. They do not go through the will. So be sure to have all of those updated. Always have them updated. Now here's what's kind of interesting. You know, a lot of times people look at these beneficiaries and they say, well, Tony, I'll just leave the kids and let's say one of my children is not around or something happens or they become wayward. Won't it just all pass down to my grandchildren? Well, we're going to go over to the whiteboard. This is kind of an interesting concept. In the legal terms, and we've been talking about trees and roots and everything, there's 2 terms that come into play when we're talking about beneficiaries, and that's PerSturpees and per capita. Actually, PerSturpees, the Latin means branches or roots, so you'll see why they call it PerSturpees. So we're going to imagine something here. We're going to imagine that one spouse, we'll say the other spouse is deceased, has $300,000 in a 401k. Again, everything in a 401k passes by beneficiary. It does not go through the will. And they're going to leave their beneficiaries what's called PerSturpees. Now we have another person over here that has $300,000, and they're going to leave their beneficiaries this money per capita. Well, what's the big deal? What's the difference? Well, let's walk through this. So let's say when this person dies and they want to leave 1/3 to each child. So we have a child here, and that one means that each child will get $100,000. Okay, so let's say everything's gotten outdated. Maybe a child has died in the meantime and the beneficiaries were not updated. However, in the beneficiary designation, the name of the child was listed and it said, PerSturpees. So what that means is, if this child were unfortunately not around anymore and the beneficiaries were not updated, because it was PerSturpees, the children of that child would get their fair share. Now, as you'll see in a minute, sometimes people don't want this to happen. You never know what the marital situations are like of children or whatever, but this is what PerSturpees means, and you're trying to make sure, if you think of the branch again, the branch continues on to the blood relative that is deceased and onto that blood relative's children. That's PerSturpees. Now, what does per capita mean? Let's say in this example, same thing, someone has a $300,000 401k. They want to leave to each child $100,000, and for whatever reason, they list the beneficiaries after each name of the child per capita. So what does that mean? Let's take this same example. Let's say this 3rd child has passed away, nothing's been updated. For whatever reason, they maybe did not want the children of that child down here to get anything. The per capita would overrule that. That means that they would not get anything. And that means that $50,000 of this share of the deceased child's money would then go to the other 2 children. So it would almost follow the blood relatives, not the children of the deceased child. So I know this gets a little complicated, and you might be saying, Tony, I don't know what to do now. Well, that's the whole point, folks. You can do something now. You know, it's too late when you pass away. There's no do-overs. You can't go back and change this stuff. This is why it's so important to get a handle on all of this money you've worked so hard to create all these years to make sure it goes to who you want it to go to. Now, incidentally, we have a free download on our website. It's called the Last Day Planner. You know, the first thing you've got to do, folks, if you're going to get this stuff in order, you have to get your thoughts organized and in writing. And this is a great little tool. It's absolutely free. All you do to get this is you go to TonyWalkerFinancial.com. In the section there, the search bar, you're going to type in downloads, and you're going to scroll and search for the Last Day Planner. Now, here's what you're going to do with this Last Day Planner. It's going to allow you to start organizing your thoughts, laying out everything, and then you're going to see you got some holes in your plan, and then you can take something like that Last Day Planner and contact myself or get with an attorney and start shoring up those beneficiaries and those plans for not only now, but when something happens to you. So don't delay. If you're sitting there and you really realize you're not organized, it's been a while since you've looked at things maybe are outdated, give us an opportunity to talk to you about your plans, not only for retirement, but what happens to all of your stuff when you're no longer here. We're very experienced in this area and we want to help. Just log on to TonyWalkerFinancial.com or call the toll-free number on your screen. Well, does the Bible have anything to say about trees and branches and making sure everything flows to where it's supposed to go? Oh yeah, we got some good stuff coming up. You stay tuned. Let me get me another cup of coffee. You're watching the Worry-Free Retirement. I'll be right back. Whether you're a long-time viewer of the Worry-Free Retirement or just catching it for the first time, know this: you can watch past episodes and educational clips by visiting our YouTube channel. Just log on to youtube.com and search Tony Walker Financial. Have you recently retired, been laid off, or offered a pension buyout? Has the company you work for moved, been acquired, or closed its doors forever? And finally, do you have a 401k with a previous employer you'd like to move to safer territory? Then take advantage of this opportunity to move your 401k or lump sum pension to Tony Walker Financial. Let's meet in person to discuss your retirement options. Log on now to TonyWalkerFinancial.com to schedule your free, no obligation appointment. Let us help you today. One of the main tasks of an arborist is to care and maintain trees. One way the arborist assures that the tree remains healthy is by pruning it. Without pruning the tree, which usually involves cutting off the dead limbs and branches, the tree's growth could be stunted and even die. You know, our faith and the nurturing and care it needs on a regular basis is a lot like a tree. Without someone pruning and shaping it, our faith can begin to fade, or worse yet, it too can die. Faith, like a strong tree, needs to be firmly rooted in good soil, and that soil is not the soil made with human hands nor human effort, but must be rooted in God. It must be fed, it must be nurtured, and yes, sometimes pruned of dead wood. So whose job is it to prune us? Well, as we take a look at John 15:1, Jesus says, "I am the vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it, that it may bear more fruit." We slide over to verse 5. It says, "I am the vine, and you are the branches. He who abides in me," that means lives in me, "and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing." So here's the million-dollar question. Are you trying to grow your faith on your own? Or worse yet, putting too much faith in the ways of the world, the politicians, the stock market, and yes, even the economy? Well, friend, as much as we would like to think that our faith can be enriched by the things of this world, it cannot. That's because nothing in this world lasts forever. No matter how much money you have, no matter how big and loving your family tree happens to be, in the end, we all must be pruned. All the things of this world are temporary except for the things of God and our faith in Him. The only thing that will grow your faith is to allow God to work in you, and yes, at times, to prune off the dead stuff. Problem is, this whole pruning experience can be very painful. It can cost us money, the loss of loved ones, and yes, even the pruning away of a sinful thought or behavior. The good news is, this pruning allows your faith to grow and flourish and produce more fruit. God's work of pruning us provides us an enduring faith that only He can sustain. Jesus is the vine, His Spirit is the lifeblood to us, and the branches, and there is no other way around this. So if you allow His Spirit to be cut off, your faith is going to die, and so will the value of your service to others. You know, as we record this show on September 1st, 2020, I fear that this nation is happening to lose their faith. As citizens, we have seemed to collectively have died. There's no life in us, no spirit, no evidence that God is working in us. We seem to be more concerned about pleasing ourselves and others than we do Him. Spiritually speaking, the fears and the worries of this world have literally sucked the life right out of us. But thank God that our faith is not rooted in man nor of the things of this world. Our faith is rooted in God. Don't believe me? Check out Colossians 2, 6 and 7. And it says, "As you therefore have received Christ, so walk in Him." How have we received Him? By faith. Having been firmly rooted and now being built up in Him and established in your faith, just as you were instructed, and overflowing with gratitude. Verse 8, "See that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception." You see, folks, when you're rooted in God and in His Word, that faith produces a lack of fear and a lack of worry, and it produces gratitude. Grateful that we are here and that He is shaping us for the things to come. Well, how about you? Thinking about the things to come, have you laid out your plans for the future in a way that not only allows you to use and enjoy your money while you still can, but make sure that when you're dead and gone, your family can sustain itself and that the branches won't be just randomly cut off, leaving your family with a mess? Well, if not, why not? At Tony Walker Financial, we are here to help. I have over 36 years of experience in the field of helping people plan their futures. I've worked with over 15,000 savers. We have a very large staff to service our clientele, and we're asking for the opportunity just to sit down, no cost, no obligation, to see how we might help you better plan and make sure that your financial tree is being pruned and properly managed. To get started with us and to see how we work, all you got to do is log on to TonyWalkerFinancial.com. Once there, you're going to scroll down and click on that Let's Get Started button. Once you click on the button, we're going to contact you, and then we can either meet by phone, or if it warrants, we'll be happy to meet with you in person at either our Bowling Green, Louisville, or Lexington, Kentucky offices. So don't put off pruning that tree. Let's get things in shape now. Log on to TonyWalkerFinancial.com. Well, we hope you've enjoyed today's program. Next week, an interesting show. We have a lot of questions about what happens to our investments and our retirement during an election year. I'll be covering that next week, but between now and then, you remember, if all else fails, you be worry-free. Make it a good one.